Okay, so what I suggested was that we talk about what things in our writing we find to be a real challenge. Not promotion, not finding the time, but actually creating something, some type of prose, or well, I suppose we're not poets, so never mind that. But something that we still find challenging, and whether we're still trying to achieve it or whether we've given up. And I gave as an example my failure, as I've seen it, or not quite being able to write cosmic horror like H.P. Lovecraft. Now, H.P. Lovecraft wasn't I mean, he had certain good points in his writing, but he's also got a lot of problems, and I won't even go into those. But he really did sort of manage to create this feeling as you're reading some of his works that you're kind of beyond human experience, and you're experiencing something that's totally unknown to humanity, and this feeling of cosmic dread, where it's not that the devil's going to get you or some ghost is going to get you, but that the universe really doesn't care about you, and if something terrible happens to you, that's just the way it is. That sort of remoteness feeling. And I've never somehow when I create a story, there's human characters, and I always get sucked into dealing with those human characters and bringing them alive and giving them human type problems, and the cosmic horror just doesn't happen. So that's my example. And there's other things that I have problems with, like action scenes, where people are actually in combat of some sort, or they're doing something physical. And to me, I don't know. I think when I read stuff like that, I rapidly get bored with detailed descriptions of fights, and so I can't write them well myself. And I just want to get on with it and get on to what happens after the fight. So there's that too. And so those are my two examples. And I guess I'm still trying to achieve both of them, especially the cosmic horror thing. But I don't know. So anyway, I'd be really interested to hear about your folks' experiences with your writing challenges.
Well, first, before I start, just what you said made me think of something, and I don't know if you want to explore and experiment with this, but what if you placed your characters in an environment where that sense of disconnection and the universe is doesn't care what happens to you in that kind of environment? Like, for instance, the whole thing say it doesn't have to be a science fiction per se, but it's set maybe on a spaceship that's just en route somewhere. So there's no action or anything. It's whatever happens to these people, maybe within the confines of that ship on a very long journey. And that could also be dull, though, if you don't have action. But I'm just saying that would put them in that kind of environment. Maybe try it as a short story. Maybe you have a concept, and then see if that, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
Okay.
I've done something like that. I have at least, a couple stories where I've tried to focus on the environment and the person really, I'm not dealing with the person's issues, but just with them as experiencing whatever it is.
Right. But being surrounded by cold and personal, and you don't have to have them feel about it or respond about it, but that gives you your setting, and that's like the undertone. So
Mhm.
I don't know, maybe. So for me, let's see, I guess if you're talking about the types of things that are difficult for me to attack, I've mentioned this ages ago, but romantic scenes just I can't. Partly, I will never write a romance novel, and if I do, run like hell because I cannot. And I think part of it is a bit prudish, but I'm also just, reading romance never, it's like I start nodding off in movies or whatever whenever it's the romantic part, and unless it's a comedy romance, a rom com, whatever, that's part of it, right? But onto about the real romance parts, the sex parts. Just I can't, and I'm not going to. So, but as far as really what on a regular basis, the most difficult thing for me to tackle is plot. Um, like I have story concepts, and I even have a plot concept, but trying to translate that into chapters and with comedic timing, et cetera, because conceptually I can come up with something and say, oh, what if I put my characters in that situation, but it's, not a specific tiny situation, the broader, like this story is going to be about whatever. this book is going to be whatever. I really have trouble trying to just break that down. I've tried outlining, et cetera. It never seems to work because when I go to write, that's when I really have that problem. Like for instance, I'm currently working on two different books, and both of them I must have ripped up. I have good dialogue I'm saving from both, but I've ripped them up because it's just not working. You know what I mean? And that's the hardest part. Not that I can't do it. I do it. I have done it in the past, but it's the most difficult part of the process. Once I've got that plot down and I really do know almost on a chapter by chapter level what I want to do, then the writing can really begin. Then I've got something. And then I've mentioned before too, if I have trouble bridging from one plot element to the next, that's okay. I work from either end and see if I can meet somewhere in between. But it's just that breakdown. I don't want to say like what I'm working on now because I may throw it out, but also it's kind of a clever idea. And when you hear it, you would say, if you know the characters, say, "Oh my gosh, that's so funny! That would be great." But again, it's just difficult.
So do you know what the ending is when you're
Yeah,
uh,
I kind of know beginning and end, which usually think that's enough. But how do I put this? It's sort of like say you want to write a movie like Casablanca, okay? And you want to start somewhere in France, and it's set with this person who had the love of his life, walk out of him for whatever reason, and at the end, she's going to leave with this other guy, but with all the stuff that happened between you got to work out things like the subplots, like, oh, what if we have that this is taking place when people are also trying to buy their way out of the country, the Germans are coming in, and then you have that whole the Ugarte storyline and all that. It's putting all those elements in that help keep pacing. The grand concept can be there. It's about love and it's about these two people who were fated to be together, but really they don't. They don't. They because of love or whatever. So you could come up with that, and it's just working out all the other things that are going to support. That's the idea. So if it's a bridge, it's all those trestles or whatever they are, that the pylons, whatever that support. Right.
Yeah, what's worked for me at times is thinking in scenes. So you're thinking about this thing all the time in the back of your mind. So you see these scenes in your head and you write them out, and then you can kind of link them together and shuffle them
Well,
around.
but that's where it breaks down because that's when I realize this isn't working.
Uh,
When I get to I do, that's exactly what I do. I start to come up with these scenes. And once I start to write the scenes, I realize, either this plot can be over in 5 pages, which is an issue, I know it's not going to be funny enough, or it's just going to drag. I'm going to put too much filler. It's got to have a hook. I think
mhm.
that's yeah. Anyway,
You mentioned at one point that you generally, I think this is what you said, I'm going to paraphrase it, something along the lines of you come up with somebody's here and this is what's happening. And then, you know, but that's basically what I do when I write. And whenever someone says plot, it's like, what's a plot? I just I have an idea, and Audrey, you asked if Richard knows how a story is going to end when he starts it, and I legitimately never know how it's going to end when I start it. And
I
so the idea of a plot, I mean, you can go back to the plotters versus pantsers or whatever. You know, I think the best approach is probably somewhere in between the two of those, but I don't know how to do I don't know how to write without just being a full-blown pantser.
Well, I can do what you suggest, what you say on a short story level for sure. I mean, because that's just a scene usually, or a
Yeah.
series of
Yeah.
scenes, and
Yeah.
and I don't need to know where it's going to go. That's the great thing about a short story. I do love, and I keep saying I want to get back to doing more short stories again, but that's what I loved about them. I just get a actually, it could start in the middle of something. It could start at the beginning. It doesn't matter. You've got this one idea that you want to get out, this one feeling, this one emotion, whatever it is, concept, and you want to get that out in a short story. That I can do. But for a book, I honestly think about things like, well, what is it I'm trying to accomplish? What story do I want to tell people? in the first book I wrote, it really was a bit about the nature of good and evil, of death and living, of even a bit about evolution, whatever. All these little concepts I had, and I wanted to put that as a subtext. So they helped move the story. I knew what my subtext was. And with the second one was again about sort of, I guess, a little bit about growing up and a little bit about the subtle changes that can happen to you as in those years when you become an adult. It was really a subtext, very subtle, but it's there. Anyway, but thanks. I think I'm like I said, it's not a problem. It's just where I have the most difficulty because obviously I've done it. So, but I want to write more short stories. Now, take that back in me.
I'll go next. The first one I'm going to talk about is incredibly difficult for me to describe, but a couple of people I've known over the years who write in a style that I don't know how to describe it, but it's very random, and it's random, but it flows and there's a rhythm to it, and every time I read something that they've written, I say I want to write something like that. But I just don't even know how they do what they do. But again, hard to describe that one. The next thing on my list is going to surprise, I think, all of you, is I need to incorporate more description into my stories because I think I read my first novel, reread it at some point in the last couple of years, and I was amazed at how much description I had in it, but I didn't think it was overwhelming. And now I write stories that I feel like there's frequently very little description, and I need to find some happy middle ground between virtually no description and too much description. So
do you really, or is this just because people said they want description?
no, I think I do. And I don't know that I don't know that anybody I've seen people read my stories say it needs more description, but I feel like I've gotten to this point where I like strip down everything to just tell the story. And I think there is some need for setting and something more than what I'm doing. And I don't know, if you've read anything that I've written recently, what you think about this concern, but I just feel like I do need to get back to some, setting what people look like a little bit, in the context of telling the story. So, and the third one is, I just wrote down grittier stories, and I feel like even my stories that are gritty are still plain vanilla. And I want to come up with a way to write something that's just grittier and darker and dirtier, and I want to get out of being plain vanilla. Bertold looks like he's going to say something.
Not real. I think you're very good at the gritty stories, but the basement
Yeah.
comes to mind.
I agree. I'm surprised you're saying that, but
I feel like even the basement is a good example of gritty, but I also feel like there's something about it that is just kind of, I don't know. Maybe it's just, you're your own worst critic.
Well, I
And
mean,
I just,
this is why you're great at it, because you're like, I can always be better.
yeah. Okay.
On the other hand,
Thank
I
you.
like grittiness for its own sake. You know, like I'm not sure what you mean by grittiness. Do you mean things like people who are involved in shady occupations, or just describing people's situations and getting all the dirt and grime in,
I
or
think all of it. I don't like I said, I just and I'll be the first to acknowledge that everybody is their own worst critic, but I just, even when I write something that is like The Basement, it's definitely a gritty story, it still comes off feeling to me as it's a little bit like I said, plain vanilla.
Mhm.
And I want to it might be, in combination with the first thing I said in terms of how some of these people I know write, it's kind of combining the two and coming up with a way to make it just even more of what it is. I don't know how to describe it, but I like I said, I always feel like even the difficult stories are still a little too blah.
I know one of my problems is I have a hard time giving my characters, making them suffer. You know, I mean, even when
I
I'm,
don't have that problem.
they always, I always let them off too easily. Maybe at least I feel I do. Maybe that's not so, but yeah, I mean, you're supposed to torture your characters, but I guess if you kind of, if you sort of like your characters, it's kind of hard to really. Also, the other thing is, if you write, if you give the characters problems just for the sake of giving them problems, I think that kind of shows. I mean, the problems have to be part of the overall plot. You can't just
Yeah.
say, okay, someone's going from point A to B, and oh yeah, I have to give them problems so they have a flat tire, or they trip and fall and get injured and have to take a side trip to the hospital, and then they get out of the hospital and they're still carrying on with whatever the plot is. I mean, that's sort of like filler rather than the real thing. So I don't
That's
know.
what I
That
wanted
is,
to avoid. Right. That's the thing. I want to avoid that. I hate that. So yeah. Mark,
pardon, I think I missed something, Richard. You dislike what about that?
oh, I was agreeing with you because I really dislike plot filler, and that's what I'm
Yeah.
trying to avoid. When I find myself doing that, that's when I throw the plot away. But Mark, to your first point, when you were talking about people who, any of them like, famous authors, et cetera, or do you have authors that when you said, I don't know how they do what they do?
Yeah.
You know,
Oh, do I have some famous authors who are
or
maybe
any authors that you want to call out and just say, these people, it's like when I read this stuff, it's amazing, or I.
I'd have to think about that, but
Okay.
there are two people. One is a guy I used to work with, and the other is a guy that I met in a running group, just local people who um, are writers too, and we share things, and I read them, and it's just like I want to be able to. I would love to be able to write a story in the way that they do it. The closest I got to, I think, at least one of the writers in terms of how he wrote was The Irreparable Past. Because
Right, you did mention that before.
yeah, but other than that, I'd have to think about a published author who fits what I'm trying to describe, and I don't know at the moment.
Okay, I was just curious, really.
There are two areas where I have big problems writing, and it picks up something Richard said and something that Audrey said. I can't write sex scenes. I just end up giggling. It's just so to make people like your characters, and then to put them into that sort of situation. No, as I say, I just end up giggling. It's just I've never been able to take them from the sort of romantic thing where she looks into his eyes and she falls deeply into deep dark pools of love and excitement and all the rest of it. Oh, for crying out loud, let's just go on with it. They disappeared into the bedroom. The following morning, the birds were singing. So as far as I'm concerned, that is what does it, right? We don't have to go into all the whatever. It doesn't. The second one I have a big problem with is writing fight scenes. Now, whether it's a good thing to admit or not, I don't know, but I have never actually physically been in a fight. I've seen them, and
Me
I've
neither.
been around gunfire, and I've been in tear gas situations, but I have never actually physically been in a fight myself. So when you write these books, and he says he put the elbow in this area, and then he twists his arm over that area, and then he grabs her from behind. You say, hang on a minute, is this the Michelin Man or what? Because that just doesn't work. And I do try and get my other half to sort of say, okay, now, if you were going to do this, that, no, ouch, that hurts. No, hang on. You just basically, I don't know the fight moves. The nearest I've got to experiencing something that I was having big trouble with, because I'm not very good on the sort of the guns and the bullets that go into them and all the technical details and that. And when I was in America, my hostess son took me to a shooting range, And he said, right, now you can fire a gun for the first time. And I thought, ouch, wow, okay. Well, I fired it once. I took a large chunk out of my thumb because I didn't realize it was going to hit me, because it was only a little revolver. It wasn't anything particularly large. And I thought, right, I put it down very carefully, took the earmuffs off, and outside I went and waited for them to finish their allotted time. So, but as far as plots and things go, I have a story in my mind. I know what the beginning is. I know what my characters are going to do. I know what the ending is. And I've just got to take them from A to B. If they don't take charge first and take me on a slightly different path, but I still determine that they're going to get back to that end point that I have decided that they are going to, whatever. And Audrey, I make my characters suffer dreadfully.
I know. Yeah, I read a couple of your books.
I mean, I blow them up or I leave them behind in a war-torn civil war or whatever. So I'm not kind to the characters. But as I say, the only thing at the moment I've got is that I've got very little energy and I just haven't been writing, and I've got to get back to it. But those are my big stumbling points, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So since two of you have commented on not being able to write sex scenes or romance, two of the things on my list of stories I eventually want to get to, one is, I think I've described before, and I think Bertold is aware of, what I refer to as a sexy space romp. So there will be stuff in there. But the other one is, years ago I started something, and if I ever go back to it, it's going to be a set of 3 novellas that are erotica. So I guess I don't have the sex scene problem.
I would think, Mark, the sex scene in spacesuits would be nigh on impossible, but I'll leave it to your creativity.
Well, it's not happening in the spacesuits.
Yeah, well, maybe in a weightless environment you could have something. But those sex scenes, I think the only time you really need them is if you are writing erotica. Otherwise,
right.
What's the point? I mean, then as Lucinda said, you just take them to the bedroom and leave them to it, and then you move on the next day or whatever, or later on. But yeah, so in terms of, I think really it's the actual lead up to the point where it becomes inevitable that's interesting to me. Once they're actually going to do stuff, well, goodbye. But yeah, I mean, it's the kind of emotion part.
Does it make you feel like a peeping Tom trying to write a scene like that?
It's a giggly thing, like how much detail, put this part. It's kind of like the fight scene in a way, except that in terms of the sex scene, you kind of know how things work. Whereas with the fight scene, if you haven't been in a fight, and most of us haven't been in a physical fight, it's sort of hard to describe all the moves, in which case I think less detail is better than more. Or, for the fight scene, or just to avoid fight scenes altogether, because most plots don't really need, I mean, unless you're writing a thriller or something. Well, I don't know. I guess it's always good to have some physical stuff. What I like is pictures or scenes where somebody's following someone, or someone feels that they're being followed. Those are quite interesting, and they're not nearly as tricky as combat scenes. But anyway, that's
the woman Zoe Keithley, who was the leader of a writing group I was in for a couple of years. She would act out her physical scenes to make sure she got the description right.
Yeah.
Before I go to mine, I'll say this: a friend of mine, another writer, Peter Martuniak, who he was in the U.S. Marines, and so he writes very good fight scenes, and he'll do that too. He'll act out like the staging of a scene, the dialogue, everything. He like acts it out to help with his writing. So, for what that's worth. Okay, so things I would like to be able to write. I actually wish I could write literary fiction, kind of like Mark and Kevin Brennan and a few other people I know, right, that has nothing supernatural or science fiction or any of the genre things that we think of. I've thought, like, I would like to just write a story about like normal people in the everyday world doing normal stuff. But sooner or later, I
You
tried.
gotta have a zombie.
It's like, why not throw in a space elevator? I don't know what it is, but it just happens to me, and it's because I'd like to do that, but I just can't.
Why? That's interesting because I'm kind of the other way. I can't. I mean, while I've done it in a few circumstances, few stories, the idea of including a ghost story or zombies or a space element is not something that comes naturally to me. And I think I've mentioned in some places one of the stories I want to write in the near future is takes place on at a lighthouse in the 1800s, and it was originally going to be just a tale of survival, but I think I'm going to add a haunted lighthouse to the story, and trying to do that and get it right terrifies me.
Oh, that'd be a good one. Yeah, but
Well,
you don't have to have a total split between genre and literary. You can write almost any genre in a literary way. And in fact, I think I sort of do that because my things have supernatural elements, but they're not really purely supernatural. And I think the literary thing comes in more in sort of the way you approach it, and it's kind of where your narrator is at, and some of the overtones and stuff. Like, it's more of a style than a genre. Literary, it doesn't have to necessarily be about ordinary people in everyday situations who somehow have these kind of subtle issues that they have to work out, and or some sort of social problem that's being discussed. You can have ghosts and stuff and still be literary.
yeah.
That's true. No, you're definitely right about that. But I would just like to write something that is just purely like I recently read Yesterday Road by Kevin Brennan, and I'm like, what a great story. And it just how does he come up with that sort of thing without invoking some sort of genre trope or something like that? It's
But the whole basis of a story is that you have a main character or characters, right? And this is what I used to teach anyway. And you give them a problem, or you give them a mountain to climb, whatever, and they either succeed or they don't succeed, but they come out at the end different, different thoughts, different feelings, different experiences. So you could put that in any genre with any supernatural, unsupernatural, everyday things. But the whole idea is that it's got to be a change in your main character that they overcome, or otherwise, sometimes they don't, they end up in the loony bin. That's the writer's choice. But they must be changed at the end of the story to the way they are at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes the whole thing, whether you do it in a literary way or a comedy way, or whether you have aliens, zombies, whatever. That's the basis of a story. And you think of any of the great writers, and you'll find that that is the main thread that goes all the way through. In every single case, from Shakespeare to Dickens to, I don't know, I can't think of a modern writer, but whatever.
That's exactly the point. And I think, Bertold, I'm probably overreaching here, trying to get into what's in your mind, but I think, that whole idea of it's the characters, it's the challenge, etc., is in your books or or your stories. But I understand where you're coming from, because the reason why you probably fall into something supernatural or science fictiony or something is that idea of what is supporting your story underneath it all. I think you want to challenge people not on the human relationships or things that the characters are doing, but you want to challenge them on ideas. I mean, just stop and jump to where my brain is kind of pinging, which was like Isaac Asimov was not a great writer, but was a clever writer. And he would write stories about people, and that's why he was kind of weak. But underneath it was all this science fiction stuff that made you think, wow, You know, what would happen to a society if we really did rely on robots as much as would it die? Would it? I mean, he got you to think that. I think that's what you're trying to do, because I know that's what I'm trying to do on a different level, is to have an underlying message. And I think yours, the creativity you want to put there. But as said, you know, I think you have the ability to just strip all that away. But then what, again, if you're like that kind of writer, like I'm trying to be, is what is your underlying message? Like why? Underneath it all, like somebody reads it and says, "Oh, that was a great story," you know. But then when they discuss it with other people, you know what I mean? They're gonna
Yeah.
talk about other things, and I know that's what you're trying to accomplish. No writer has to, but that is one style of writing, and I think that's why I can write. Now, again, I'm probably reading in mine because I'm projecting from mine. Because you know, listen, this is perfect. I mean, perfect. It is really, that's at the core of any story. That's how you relate to people when they read it, right? I mean, they're reading, they want to understand either other people or something about themselves. But you know, you want something to keep that floating in your style of writing. So I know you could tell me if I'm right or wrong, or
No, I think you're right. I think you're exactly
okay,
right.
yeah, I know.
Do you have any ideas for a non supernatural, non science fiction story, or do you start with an idea and then eventually at some point you suddenly say, "Yeah, we need a space elevator here," or how does it end up that way?
Well, like I think I've talked about it before, but the original main character of the directorate, Teresa Gannon, was originally just it was going to be a story about a regular soldier in like the modern, just the regular world.
Mhm.
And but I just couldn't go anywhere with that. I sort of had this character in mind and maybe some things she would do, but I never could make progress. And then I started thinking about the science fiction story. And then that was when I thought, hey, I could take this character that I never could do anything with in a regular book, put her into the science fiction book, and that was how that went.
Hmm.
That's probably my best example of that.
But your characters are the most important thing. And again, this shows why some people like reading some genres and other people are turned off by the same genres. If you can connect your character to your reader so they care about them. So it doesn't matter whether she has a space elevator or she's shot out of a cannon in a circus. If you've given enough background to the way she's thinking, she's feeling, um, then people will relate to her and they will like her and they will care about what happens to her.
Hmm.
So you're saying this is an ordinary soldier. No soldier is ordinary. She's got some special traits somewhere. She's got some feelings, some reactions. She may have, and this is something that's very important, is about doing backstory. You know, you create the character out of thin air, right? But that character has been alive for 10, 20, 30 years, whatever, depending. So if you have some sort of backstory and some sort of maybe trauma or experience in their earlier life that she can draw on in memories, then we will connect with her. You know, I might not connect with her if she falls in love with a robot because I don't like books about robots. But if it's somebody who's fallen in love with somebody from another ethnic background, then you know you can understand possibly her feelings. Am I making any sense here?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I
But
think we should actually forget about genre and literary or not, but just write characters that people will care about.
Right.
And
Well, yeah.
then there's
Go ahead.
cosmic horror, but that's another thing again.
Well, that's see, Lovecraft would be like, I don't care about people, so
Yeah.
But
Well,
sorry, one of the stories that stuck with me since I was knee-high to a grasshopper was The Haunting of Toby Judd by Dennis somebody or other. And it's this guy who is an invalid in bed. And that is a supernatural sci-fi sort of Stephen King type book where he's being haunted by things that appear in his bed. And my goodness, you know, I was an invalid all the time I read that book. I couldn't get out of bed to go and tackle them, to go and challenge them, to run away from them. And that was the character, things happening to them.
I just want to sort of fine point what I was saying because I do so much agree with you. Let me put it this way. As an author, a decent author, you cannot write a good story without having characters that people can either relate to, fall in love with, whatever, and connect with on some level. I don't think you can write a decent story at all without that. Um, but you can write one, like I said, where there's subtext. You just can't do the reverse. So in the case of what Bertolt's saying and what you were saying about, it's how can I put this? It's you can write, I'm okay. This is what happens when you get older, I guess. Um, you can write like the old man in the sea, and it's truly just about a person. But you could also write something like 2001: A Space Odyssey, and and anything. I think it failed on people, but I'm just saying it's got a different kind of message, and the people are important to make a story go along. That's probably 2001 is probably the worst. The Handmaid's Tale. That's a better one. Okay. So that the subtext of The Handmaid's Tale is really the story, but Margaret Atwood could never pull it off unless the characters weren't strong enough and relatable, or you connected with on some level, or you felt their pain or whatever. So that's what I think I'm trying to say is you can be just character only, and it doesn't matter where the setting is or what they're about, and that works very well. But then you also want to be there. There's authors that want to be like the Atwoods, etc., who are writing about something else. But again, you can't do that without that character. That's why I'm agreeing with you. But I'm saying there is kind of a different style out there as well that's important. The secondary message is important too.
I
And it
agree.
doesn't have to be there. Yeah.
We're running short of time. I just
Yeah, sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. I just wanted to. But no, I agree absolutely with that.
When you brought up literary, one of the things I was going to say is, okay, can anybody actually define what literary fiction is?
No.
And I feel like what it is one of the things I always see people describe literary fiction as being character driven. And so, it's what everybody else was already saying about strong characters that people are going to care about. And it's really about the characters. It's not, and then, which goes to the third element that I was going to mention, which is it doesn't fit the tropes and the structures or whatever that genre fiction fits, whether it's a cozy mystery or science fiction or something like that. And then it's just the quality of writing is better. And I'm curious to see what other people think literary fiction is, because like I said, I don't know if it's really defined. It's kind of like it's everything that doesn't fit into a known genre or an identified genre.